Hello! I come bearing books. And September was a pretty good month for me in terms of what I read. I went through a bit of a reading slump around the August-September... Does September come after August? Yes, it does. Around the August-September threshold, I wasn't doing very well reading-wise, which is why I made a video about how Becky Chambers and The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet kind of saved me from that. And now, I've read a bunch of books. By my reckoning, I've read 9 books and 4 manga this month. I read the manga courtesy of the fact that I got myself a Kobo. I left Kindle behind and I got a Kobo. I specifically got this. I spent weeks researching it, trying to find the best Kobo for me so that I could read manga and get rid of my small manga collection and not have to buy loads and loads of volumes of manga all the time, and I could just put them all on this thing with a nice big screen. And I'm so happy I got it. This is a Kobo Forma. Oh, it was worth the investment, even though it was a little bit steep. And now I can talk about manga a lot more often, a lot more articles, a lot more videos, yay. But first, books. First thing I read this month was the transgender issue by Sean Fay. I did a dedicated video review. This is a brand new non-fiction that came out in September, and it has hopefully shaken the discussion around the transgender issue in the UK within British politics, British media, British law, British medical practice, everything. The UK is a very transphobic country. It's a very difficult world for us to live in. Sean Fay has taken a very mature and very well-researched approach to what we call the transgender issue. The title is tongue-in-cheek in a way because being trans is not an issue. Being trans is not a debate. Trans people have always existed. Trans people will always exist. But the British media has turned us into an issue. And Sean Fay uses this book, her power, her research, her personal story, her clout as a journalist to right a few wrongs and educate people. If you haven't yet picked up this book and you are in the UK and you are cisgender, I really, really urge you to read this book. It is so educational, informative, and kind. September was also my introduction into the works of Kieron Milward Hargrave, and I read 2 of her books. Her YA novel, The Deathless Girls, which is a retelling of the origin story of the brides of Dracula, and her adult novel, The Mercies, which is set about 300 years ago on a remote Norwegian island where all of the men suddenly die in a freak storm and all of the women learn to live alone on the island until a Scottish missionary type comes along and tries to enforce religious rules on the island and right all of this bloody womanness that's going on and reassert values and laws and a lack of liberties. These are both fantastic books in very different ways. They each excel as a YA and an adult novel. Kieron Milward Hargrave is a fantastic feminist writer. She is not transphobic, so that's wonderful. She has a very deft and astute voice. She is a powerhouse when it comes to that, actually, because she knows her audience. She knows what she's trying to do with her voice. When you read her YA novel, it feels like it's targeted at young adults, and likewise for her adult novel. The jump in maturity in terms of its dialogue and its themes and its format even is pretty incredible, and it shows that she is a master of language and formatting, and she is able to adjust herself depending on who her audience is, and I think that's really incredible stuff. I have done a dedicated video on these 2 books that you can go check out as well, but I am now a huge fan of Kieron Milward Hargrave. She is brilliant, and I love that she's always doing historical stuff, slightly fantastical stuff, almost always queer. Her stories all have a queer bent to them that gets revealed as the story goes. She's great. She really is a fantastic young British woman writer. Well done to her for being amazing. Another book that I did a dedicated video on is this, Fault Lines by Emily Itami. Emily Itami is a woman who grew up in Tokyo and is now based in the UK. She wrote this book in English, and it is set in modern-day Japan about a woman who is feeling nothing when it comes to her life. She is in a dull marriage, she's got 2 kids that she does her best to take care of, and she meets this man who is exciting and interesting, and also represents a lot of what she didn't manage to accomplish. She had dreams, she had aspirations, she almost became a pop singer when she lived in New York City. This guy used to live in France, and he has managed to turn himself into a very respected restaurateur. So not only is he a man that she has a crush on, but he's also a man who represents her dreams come to life, or anyone's dreams come to life, from the perspective of a woman who missed out on her dreams coming to life. It's not as dark and depressing as I make it sound. It's actually a very jovial story. It's told with real wit, sarcasm sometimes. It's sweet, it's interesting, and it's very relatable for a lot of reasons and for a lot of people. Beautiful cover, very short novel, about 200 pages, and I can't recommend it enough. Once again, I do have a video on this if you want to check it out. I also did a video dedicated to Japanese books that feature cats. So please go check that out. I thought it would be a bigger hit than it was in terms of its numbers, but anyway. This is The Cat Who Saved Books. It's written by Sosuke Natsukawa, and I think it's the only book by him that is currently available in English translation. It might even be his only novel, I'm not sure. But it's translated by Louise Hill Kawai, who always does a really fantastic job with her translation. The translation here is fantastic, but the writing itself is not so much. I liked and didn't like this book in equal measure. It's pretty immature in a lot of ways. It rubbed me the wrong way that it's a book that's a love letter to literature and the power of literature. That's the whole core of this novel, and yet it constantly, all the way through the books, is featuring men. Over and over again, it constantly references great works of classical literature, and they are almost always Western men. At one point, a Western woman is mentioned, at one point, a Japanese man is mentioned, but that's it, that's all we get. The rest are all dead white men, and it just annoyed me. But the story itself is very sweet and charming. I recommend it, especially if you're a younger reader, and I think it could be a really good foothold into the world of literature. You could give this to a teenage boy, and he would run with it, and he would start reading more literature. He might read what is recommended in here. He might just want to read more Japanese literature. It's really charming in that way, and I think it could be a real force for good. I just think it's a shame that the author himself is revealing that his own reading history is pretty narrowly focused on men, and that just pissed me off. I also read 2 brand new novels from France. This is A Single Rose by Muriel Barbery. It's translated from French by Alison Anderson, and it's set in Japan, specifically Kyoto. And it's about a 40-year-old French woman who finds out that her Japanese dad that she never knew has just died. He was rich, he was an art dealer, and she goes to Kyoto for the reading of the will, but more to try to discover the man that she never knew, a man that she has always begrudged and hated because he never was a dad to her, and yet when she gets there she's told that he did in fact love her. I promise, trust me, he did. But where's the evidence for that? And so she is angry and she is hurt, but she's also exploring Kyoto, and so the city gets a lot of love here. It's a really beautiful love letter to that city. I love Kyoto, it's a beautiful place, and she really manages to capture it fantastically here in this novel. And the other French novel that I read is The Mad Women's Ball. This is by Victoria Mars, it was translated by Frank Wynne, and it's just been turned into a film that you can watch on Amazon Prime, which I still haven't done yet, but I'm going to. I've heard it's pretty good. I did hear from someone in the comments on my video about French literature that the film ends just as abruptly as the book does, and that was my only real issue with it, is that it just cuts off. It's not got a real satisfying ending. But the themes and the ideas here are fantastic, and I love historical fiction by women. It is becoming one of my favorite genres easily. I keep talking about it over and over. This is set in the 19th century in a madhouse in Paris where there is a nurse who is looking after the women, and there is a young woman who comes from a bourgeois family, and her horrible, monstrous dad just throws her in the madhouse because she's partly too much. She's a feminist, she's outspoken, but also she does say that she can see and talk to ghosts, and that is in fact true. So there is a supernatural element to the book, but it's more importantly about the oppression of women, especially historically, but also of course even today. I like it. It's short, and I like short novels, but in this case I do think it could have been twice as long, because there are secondary characters who don't get enough time with us as readers, And there is an ending that is not as satisfying as it could have been if it had just been given a bit more breathing room. The book is too tight, it's too condensed, and it needed more time to cook and grow and expand. So it's 200 pages. I think it could have been 350 pages easily, and then it would have been perfect. My latest video was on this, the Song of Achilles. I finally read this. This is the 10th anniversary edition. I read Circe by Madeline Miller about 3 years ago when it came out, and I liked it, but I didn't love it. I love the Song of Achilles. I was promised that this is a better book if you only thought Circe was okay. And yeah, I did really prefer this. I thought the Song of Achilles was a masterpiece. It really is as good as people say. The Song of Achilles tells the story of Achilles, one of the most famous stories in the history of the canon of fiction, narratives, and storytelling. It tells the story of Achilles from the perspective of his lover, Patroclus. Madeline Miller re-injects homosexuality into this story where we have repeatedly over centuries been told by Western storytelling methods that Achilles and Patroclus were brothers in arms or best friends, but they were lovers. And this story really puts that relationship first and foremost. It's a novel in two parts, really. The first half is about Patroclus meeting Achilles, them falling in love, them training and growing as men together. And the second half is the Greek-Trojan War, where Greece went to Troy to fetch Helen after she was kidnapped, and Achilles and Patroclus are in the battle, they're in the army, and we meet a bunch of other Greek legends as well. But the story again of Patroclus and Achilles remains at the heart of it, and it is really sexy too. The romance, the love here is really fiery hot. I loved this book from cover to cover. Now, I have a plan for October. I've always been a Christmas person. I grew up absolutely loving Christmas. I was an only child who, of course, looked forward to all the presents, but I also like winter, I like the dark, or at least I did. Not so much anymore because adulthood leads to depression, I guess. So I just don't really like winter and Christmas as much as I did, and I've found that I've replaced that love with a love of October and Halloween, and so I'm getting more and more excited every year that goes by for Halloween. I love horror stories. I love horror novels and horror films, and I decided for October, and I'm going to talk about this more in videos in October, I decided to dedicate myself in October, for the most part, to books about witches. I've become really obsessed with witches lately, and so I wanted to read a lot more stories about witches, and I have found 14 books and novels and manga and comics about witches that I want to read and talk about in October, and I started with The Near Witch by V.E. Schwab. I've read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. That's the only V.E. Schwab book that I've read. Again, I did a video on that, and I really, really enjoyed that novel. I really did. I was obsessed with it while I was reading it, and The Near Witch is her first ever published novel, reissued about a year ago, and I keep seeing it everywhere. It's on all of the little tables in Waterstones. So I picked it up, and The Near Witch is a lot of fun. It feels a lot like Paranorman, the movie. If you've seen Paranorman, it pretty much follows the same story. I don't actually think I'm going to say any more than that because I am going to be talking about this in at least one dedicated video in October, so I think I'll just leave it be. It had a predictable narrative, but I liked the setting and the characters, and again, it reminded me of Paranorman, which is actually one of my favourite films, but I'll talk more about it in October. As I said, I also picked up this. There is no easy way to hold it. This is my Kobo. I love it to pieces, and so far this month I have read 4 manga on this. The first manga I decided to pick up to kind of christen my Kobo was Vinland Saga. Vinland Saga is written and drawn by Makoto Yukimaru, and the anime is my favourite, bar none. Vinland Saga Season 1 is my favourite anime ever. And so I had to read the manga. I was so excited. I would recommend it to people who've seen the anime. You can obviously skip the manga and go to where season 1 of the anime finishes and pick up the manga from there because the anime is entirely faithful to the story of the manga. But I recommend reading the manga from page 1, chapter 1 anyway, because it hits harder. Even though Vinland Saga is my favourite anime, I would argue that the manga is better. The translation by Stephen Paul is astonishing. He might be my favourite manga translator. I cannot overemphasize how talented he is as a manga translator, and if a manga is translated by him, even if it doesn't sound like my cup of tea, I'll give it a go because I know he will give it his all as a translator. Vinland Saga is a masterpiece. It is a Viking epic that features Leif Erikson. It is a huge epic story about revenge and muddled ethics and morals. It has like 4 different protagonists that we move between. We go from hating to loving to hating many of them. It's such a complex character drama, first and foremost. Beautifully drawn. I think I'm going to do a dedicated video, but I could talk forever about how much I love Vinland Saga. The next manga that I read was volume 1 of To Your Eternity. I am currently watching the anime. I am a huge fan of A Silent Voice by the same mangaka, which by the way is Yoshitoki Oima. She's amazing. She is an utterly incredible mangaka. If you've read or watched the film of A Silent Voice, or Koe no Katachi, you'll know how wonderful she is. And To Your Eternity is a masterpiece of strange fantasy epic narrative. It tells the story of an orb that is created by this strange godly creature. The orb is just placed on the planet. It touches a rock and turns into that rock. It touches some moss, turns into that moss. Eventually a wolf comes along and dies on top of the moss, and the orb then turns into the wolf. And then it goes out into the snow and it meets this boy in a hut in a blizzard. And it turns out that the original wolf that died belonged to the boy. The boy thinks that the orb that now looks like the wolf is his wolf. And so they go on a journey together to try to find the people of his village that left him behind years ago to look after the old people who all eventually then died. They go on this journey. This is all chapter 1, by the way. And the boy eventually dies. And the wolf then takes the form of the boy. It cannot speak, it cannot understand anything. And then it goes off by itself, repeatedly dies as it tries to find something that isn't a snowy wasteland, and repeatedly comes back to life. So you have this immortal creature that is slowly moving across the world, transforming and learning things as it goes. And I won't tell you any more. If you haven't read or watched To Your Eternity, oh, it's good. It really is good. The anime is stellar as well. It's just not as pretty as the manga. The third manga that I read was Comey Can't Communicate. I read this because it's everywhere at the moment. If you go into bookshops, this manga is just everywhere. And it's only okay. I thought that it succeeded and failed in equal measure, and I wrote a dedicated article about it. If you want to go read that, I'll link it in the description. Comey Can't Communicate is a slice of life comedy, and I think that the slice of life aspect is fantastic. It's very poignant. It's about a young teenage girl who everyone thinks is really popular and cool because she gives everyone this 1,000-yard stare, and she doesn't talk, and she acts like she's above everyone. But the reality is that she's got social anxiety and cannot bear to open her mouth and talk to people. She's too terrified. And this explores her relationship with a new boy who joins the school and takes a risk and talks to her and then tries to teach her to be more socially comfortable. And it's very relatable in that regard. I think it's a great slice of life. But it's also a comedy, and it's shit as a comedy. It's not funny at all. Every single joke misses the mark entirely. Sometimes it tries to be random and cute, like Nichijou. If you've read Nichijou or watched it, it's such a good comedy, and this feels like it's trying to be Nichijou and it just fails. The comedy is dreadful. Again, I've written an article, I might do a video, we'll see. And the final and fourth manga that I read, I'm actually only halfway through, but I'm going to mention it here because it's part of my witchy October thing. I've been reading Witch Hat Atelier. This is by Kamame Shirahama, and it has real Diana Wynne Jones vibes, which is funny because on the back of V.E. Schwab's The Near Witch, some reviewer said that she is like a natural successor to Diana Wynne Jones. And so The Near Witch and Witch Hat Atelier are really good companions to each other. Witch Hat Atelier, if you've read A Charmed Life by Diana Wynne Jones, this really feels like that. Again, I'll talk about it more in my witchy stuff video, but I really am enjoying Witch Hat Atelier. It is stunningly drawn. Shirahama is an incredible mangaka. She's also done a bunch of like covers for comics for DC and Marvel in the West, so she's popular in that regard, and this is, as far as I know, her one and only manga, and I can't believe how charming and beautifully drawn it is. She is amazing. She's a staggering mangaka, and I cannot wait to just keep reading this. I am hooked on Witch Hat Atelier. I think it's beautiful. Okay, I think that's everything. I don't know how long I was talking for. Look forward to all my witchy stuff. Happy October. Subscribe for books.